Evet, hoş geldiniz. Olmasaydı size balon şov tarzı bir şeyler yapıp gidecektim artık. Evet, Türkçe, is there anyone here who cannot understand English? Turkish? Everyone here can understand Turkish? Everyone? Anyone cannot understand Turkish? No one? Ah, one, anyone? Okay. Let's do it in Turkish. Ah, okay. Let's do it in English then. All right. State of the JavaScript UI landscape. It's an interesting and crazy topic. So, my name is Çağatay. Non-Turkish people call me Çağatay Suiki. I'm used to it. Hi Çağatay, how are you? So, I'm a front-end developer for 12 years. And the last 10 of them are working on open source. I'm making a living out of open source, which is interesting. I will tell you how. So since after graduation, I started contributing to Apache Software Foundation, Apache My Faces. I moved then to GCP, Java Community Process. Then I started creating my own stuff, which are known as Prime libraries. Anyone heard of Prime Faces? Oh, a lot of people. NG, Prime NG, which is new kid on the block. Prime React. I don't expect many hands. It's new and it's buggy. But Prime UI, it's the, okay. The new projects we are working on are Prime Vue for 2018 and Prime Elements based on web components. There are many exciting open source projects. Our company is Prime Tech based in Ankara, so I'm from Ankara. Although I'm originated from Antalya. I'm in Prime community, I'm known as Optimus Prime, which I've come up with. So, our company is in Ankara. We only do one thing, creating open source libraries. We don't do consulting training, we just do open source libraries, and we offer premium paid services like, no, not services, products like nice looking themes and pro support. So, most of the time, our libraries work. So if they don't work, you can always subscribe to Prime Pro to get support. And our free themes look okay, but if you want something better, you can purchase the premium templates. So it's a big model based on freemium with premium extensions. So we have Prime Faces, which is the most popular Java library, Java Surface library. Prime NG is for Angular 2 and 4 and 5. Prime React is for Prime React, for React, and Prime UI is for jQuery. Prime UI is not very popular because the development model has kind of passed. So the UI landscape is kind of crazy. You have a lot of things to learn. Any front-end developers, any guys here who call them front-end engineers? Front-end. Okay, not much. It's kind of hard thing, right, to keep up with all the things going on. I gave up like a year ago saying that, okay, this is enough, but because it requires too much effort and time of your life to keep up with all this stuff going on. But I decided to come up with a formula. I will share it with you to show you how to keep up with these going on. I will show you it at the end of my slides. So we have a lot of things. I will show you a small website. JavaScript Framework, yes. There's a game where I will show you a couple of logos of the JavaScript frameworks, and you will try to guess. Anyone knows this one? I don't. It looks like, I don't know, Enyo? No. This one is Chai. Which one? Chai. No. Festival, no? Oh, this is simple. I think it's Reactite, right? It's payable. Oh, no. Okay, one more. Okay, Echo. That's foundation. Okay, I give up. My highest score is 5. So there are many libraries. And in your project, you have to choose one of these, and not just libraries and frameworks, the tools as well, how to build stuff, how to test stuff. So sometimes I'm going crazy, like anyone knows which movie is from? Shining. So sometimes I look at the screen and just... So I mentioned state, but I think it's actually stateless. When you learn something, a new shiny cool thing appears on the block every like 3 months. So we were using NPM, then Yarn pop up. We were just learned Angularjs, but Angular 2 came up. We were happy with React, and then Vue popped up. A lot of things. You have more like Ember, Batman, Knockout, and more. A backbone. You have to decide, right? JavaScript UI landscape is like a jungle with a natural selection. Only the strong survives. And to be strong, usually they're backed by a strong company like Google, Angular, React, Facebook. And then we have Vue, of course, although it's not backed by a company. So how we get to this point where we were happily doing HTML, CSS with no JavaScript. We were doing server-side frameworks, although this is Adobe FX, which is not maintained anymore, and ASP.NET Web Forms has been outdated now, and people are using other newest technologies of .NET. So JSF is kind of one of them, but it's still quite popular in the enterprise world, in the internal applications. These guys were quite popular because JavaScript was not powerful, the language itself and the browsers. So in my time in 2005, we were just using JavaScript to do fancy demos, like you move the mouse and some like small dots were following the mouse. So it was the usage of JavaScript. And I was in a conference in Austria where a famous bank, I met with a developer from a famous bank in Austria. They said that their application, they have a rule, no JavaScript. So in 2008, they are building an application with JavaScript because they are a bank. They have to do this. But nowadays, yeah. So JavaScript then started to conquer the world with Node.js and NPM. Everyone was doing JavaScript. It was easy to learn. You don't have like a CS degree, right, to learn JavaScript. You can take a course from online. After 6 months, those ads, I was something, but after 6 months, I started my own job as a front-end developer. So, but the JavaScript has its own problems. And from guys like who know Java and C# don't like JavaScript because it's functional. We prefer, I have a Java background. We prefer object-oriented. So, but then the ECMAScript 6 and it showed up with the new class architecture, with the modular architecture. Before that, the Babel and the Typescript, now we are able to use these powerful tools to generate JavaScript. So JavaScript is like, like the machine code. We generate JavaScript. In my job, I usually write TypeScript for Angular, and when I do React, I use Babel. I don't know how to use Babel or Babel. So I don't usually write plain JavaScript as I'm used to. So in this talk, I will cover 3 candidates. These are the big 3 in the current, by 2017, November. They are the big 3 players. Who are using React in their application? 10, 15. I was expecting with more. Angular, wow, 1, 2, okay. Vue.js, okay, interesting. I was expecting React a bit more. Anyone developing jQuery with the REST service? Not many, right? Or people are like, okay, we're still doing jQuery. It's like not using jQuery is like a show-off. When you do a front-end discussion, okay, I'm not using jQuery for 5 years. And you guys, okay, I'm not using it for 6 years. So. Okay, I will cover these 3. So in JavaScript, you create modules, and your apps are modular. So they are single JS files, and you depend on other JS files, like you have a service, you have a component that depends on other stuff. So they have to be bundled. They have to get together. And to do that, currently we are creating bundles. So your whole application is like usually one JavaScript file or a couple of JavaScript files, and they're bundled in one mega bundle. And we are trying to find out how to make that small so that on a mobile device or when network is bad, we can just use it effectively. So we have a couple of bundlers. like Webpack, Rollup, Require.js, Browserify. Usually the trend is like on Webpack. Whenever I see a project, the project is built with Webpack. Angular CLI is using Webpack. Create React app is using Webpack. Vue.js is using Webpack. So what I always say is Webpack is good when someone else configures it for you. So it's quite complex to configure to begin with. Lot of stuff. So it can load your images, styles, and things. So usually, luckily, there are like library seed projects that does it for you. So Webpack, if you're doing a web application in 2007, you will probably face with Webpack. And one of these three, probably. So it started with jQuery. I was in Washington, D.C. in 2008 for Rich Web Experience Conference. So what do you expect from a Rich Web Experience Conference in 2008, like 10 years ago? No Angular. Oh, of course you expect jQuery. And it was the birth of jQuery. I was passing a conference room, and it was saying jQuery, the future, which is now past. So I was thinking, what is jQuery? It's like query something for database. Then I started to use jQuery in prime faces. I was using Yahoo UI for prime faces. I switched to jQuery. So the idea of jQuery is that to do DOM manipulation, to add classes, do Ajax and simple stuff like that, to access DOM directly. So if you have a simple div, you can append other content, query it, and add event handlers and so on. The problem with this approach is this one. So currently we are doing web component-based programming with all these frameworks. But with jQuery, the markup, the DOM, and the logic is separated. So you have that input or regular DOM in your page, and your logic in somewhere else. So you cannot find out what's going on, and it becomes really complex. People tried it creating applications using jQuery, but it never worked. It has never worked. So there's something called Jquery Spaghetti, because it really becomes a spaghetti. Even we are trying to come up with demos, and when we write demos with it, it becomes a spaghetti. So people just move on. You know, if they are not happy with it, we create new stuff. That's what us human beings do. Then a website showed up called You Might Not Need jQuery. jQuery was everyone's first tool, but then a website called, and jQuery was exposed. Really, with the emergence of APIs like query selector and things like that, people realized that we don't really need jQuery. So if you check out this website, it will convince you that you don't need jQuery. But there's a problem. There are many websites or plugins written in jQuery. So jQuery still gets like 5 million downloads per month. It's a lot. It's 5 times more than Vue.js. Although it's an old technology, people still rely on jQuery. Maybe not for creating apps, but creating widgets and so on. Maybe those sliders that you see on WordPress websites. But not anymore to create websites. I sometimes believe that Angular and React killed jQuery with AngularJS. In AngularJS, you have your HTML web page, and you create an ng app to mark a certain page, certain area as an application of Angular, and you work with controllers. Controllers, as the name suggests, control the part of the page, and you can do model binding and event handling and many things on that certain part. In this case, you create an Angular module, and you create your applications with controllers. Each controller has a scope. So Angular introduced the binding concept, and people just started to like it, and it became really, really popular. And lately, Angular also introduced the idea of components instead of controllers, because Angular 2 depends on components. So in AngularJS 1, AngularJS means Angular 1, actually. So in AngularJS, you also have the idea of components. A component has a template and a controller. I looked in at AngularJS when we were trying to come up with a new project like PrimeNG. but we didn't like all the hard things going on, the complex things like digest scope, the controllers. We didn't like it much, so we just skipped that. Luckily, Google decided to rewrite it, so it was our chance. When we heard the idea that after they announced it in AGConf, I guess, that they will just rewrite it, it was our chance to come up with Prime Engine. So it is still okay, downloads are over 1 million, but it's just going down. If you just visit their website, it just says try the new Angular. So will you use Angular 1 for a new project? No, right, because it's old and it's not really suggested that much, although it's maintained. Although Google has got a lot of criticism because of rewriting the project, because, I mean, updating is not trivial in this case, because they are different projects, and maybe the name should have been different, because when you search for on Stack Overflow, if you write Angular, you get Angular 1, Angular 2, and a lot of things, which is quite confusing. So the Angular showed up. It took for like maybe Google 2 years, I guess, to write Angular. It was highly anticipated. It got criticism first from the AngularJS users, but now people are used to it, and people, the community, the Angular community, I think, moved to Angular 2 from Angular 1. Right now, the latest version is Angular 5. So every 6 months, they are doing a new release. Maybe it will scare you, but it should not, because from us, migration from 4 to 5 has been trivial. Just updated our dependencies. So it's cross-platform. AngularJS was a library, like jQuery, but Angular 2 and Angular 5 is a framework, maybe a platform, because it runs on desktops, mobile, and browsers. Google claims that the performance has been really well because AngularJS had some problems when the page gets complex. Still, we face with some issues with Angular. There is this called, I will explain it later, but sometimes if you don't watch out, your page will really slow down. I will just give you an example with that. It has a giant community. The framework is complex, so the trainers, they have a business. There are many websites to sell Angular trainings, and there are UI libraries, so we are there with Prime Faces. The Angular team calls us Prime Faces, although we are Prime AG, but we don't say nothing about it. So there are books, trainings, and a lot of things. So TypeScript, anyone knows TypeScript here? Okay, I think you already like it, I think. I personally like it because I can give types to my properties. I can just create interfaces like I am doing Java. So if you know Java or C# or something similar, it will be like a couple of days for you to start TypeScript. So TypeScript is like a superset of JavaScript. So it gives you types, classes, interfaces, extensions, and so on. So I'm really a fan of TypeScript. Angular uses TypeScript. Also, you can do Dart or JavaScript, but all the examples and tutorials are in TypeScript. So if you're not aware of TypeScript, and if you'd like to start with Angular, you must know or learn TypeScript first. So in Angular, we have a template. The Angular is component-oriented. Every component is a template, and it has a model. So the model is bound to the template, and you also have directives like in AngularJS to manipulate the DOM elements. And components are defined with the metadata like a component. And the nice feature is the services. Angular can provide you services and do injection as well. It is modular, and it has tons of modules. Of course, I cannot cover all of them. So this is an Angular application. Like, this can be also a web component or a React or Vue, right? You never know. So this is in 2007 how we built applications. We created MyApp, and the framework just fills in the application. So what's that MyApp? The MyApp is like your root Angular component. So this is one example of an Angular component. It's called Hello World. We have a component annotation. It's called decorator in JavaScript land. In Java, it's annotation. We create a selector, means that whenever there's a custom element called hello world, create this component, and this is my template. It's just a div, and there's this interpolation called double curly braces, and you can just bind that text to that field. And that at input means a property, so the component can receive properties from outside. So the text would be prime, and the component will display prime. So here is how that my app shows up. You have that my app, and in the template I'm using hello world. I'm not doing this binding thing. In Angular, we use the brackets for binding. And when the application starts up, I get the username, and I set it to it, and the template will be updated. The syntax is like this. When you just want to do read-only stuff, you can use curly braces. For one-way binding, it is the brackets. For events, they're also possible. And you can use both to do two-way binding with ng model. This is how inputs work in Angular. We have this ng model property. So when you type something, at every key up, the Angular will update your property. If you have used AngularJS, this is the same story, right? And suppose that I have my component with the user property, and in my template I have a model. So whenever I type that, I will just receive what the user has typed. In Angular 5, there's a property called update on blur, so that Angular will update your input on blur event. Angular has more stuff like reactive forms. They are more complex, but it gives you more reactivity when you're handling forms. Instead of going all the inputs and adding ng model, you can use form control name, which binds to your backend, form group. So you can create dynamic forms easily, and you can get notified whenever the form changes. So it's a quite nice feature. The community is like divided. Some are preferring the ng model, and some are preferring the programmatic model. So if you just want to use your templates to create your model, then go with the template-driven one, which is ng model. Or if you like dynamic stuff and want to be more flexible, go with the reactive forms. Again, a lot of things to learn. So you have the forms and reactive forms. This is one of my favorite features. It's called services. In Angular, in an application, we need services, right? To do a call to a remote URL, whether it's a Node.js server or .NET server. So we need services. And in Angular, services are injectable instances. And for example, here I have a service. It's called injectable. And I'm injecting this service, HTTP service as well, so that I can do a call. And I'm just returning a promise with the data from a RESTful URL. In my components, I import that service and inject it using the constructor. Angular uses constructor injection, no property or setter injection, so that I can get all my stuff using the injection. You don't have to worry about how the car service is managed. This is where the things get tricky. So you start with the Angular tutorials, you start writing something, but all of a sudden this modular architecture has been introduced. I was working with Angular 2.0 release candidate 4, and from 5 they have changed the architecture between a release candidate, and they call it a release crisis or something, because the marketing pushed, I guess the marketing team pushed the Google Angular team to come up with 2.0 final before the ngconf last year. So they had to change architecture between the release candidates, which was not a good idea, I guess, but I think they had to. So in Angular, everything is a module. A module can have components, directives, services, and things like that. You can share between applications and within your application. Suppose that you have a module A and module B and module C. Modules can import themselves and export another things as well. For example, module A imports B, and the module B imports module C. The syntax is kind of complex, but you got to do this when you are doing Angular. So I have my module A that imports a common module that like the utilities, and it has 2 components and exports component A1. So whoever imports my module A won't be seeing component A2. or we'll be using that. Similar to that, module B is importing module A, so it gets all the exported stuff from module A. So what can be a module? In PrimeNG, all the components are modules, like input text, drop-down, tab view. So when you need to use something from PrimeNG, you import the module, like import drop-down module from PrimeNG. When you do that, you don't get the data table or the other things, right? Simple. So the idea is that divide and conquer. Everything is modular. And this is what you have to do when you are creating an application. Your application is a module. So what you need in your application, you need the browser module, forms to handle forms, HTTP module to do Ajax calls, maybe here PrimeNG data table or drop-down, and your declarations like your stuff, like what you have in your application, your pages. Well, Angular is really, really complex, and it will get complex. Sometimes it is a good thing, but maybe sometimes not. So it has built-in HTTP to do calls. Validations are built-in as well. You can write custom validators. Angular will just highlight inputs with styles. Just in time on AOT compilation, when you run the Angular in development mode, it will compile the templates on the browser, which will be a killer in the production environment. So when you are going to production, you have to do the AOT so that your application should be compiled during build time. There are animations I'm a really fan of because we are doing UI libraries, like things have to fly, fade in, fade out. There's built-in solutions, I really like it. Router is there to do page navigations. Change detection is built in, so when you do change a model, Angular will just update the page for you, which can be a killer sometimes if you don't watch out. There's lazy loading so that you can only load the home page and the other pages can be loaded on demand so that your application can be loaded, initialized much faster. RxJS is the reactive extension, so you can work with observables and subscriptions, which is an advanced topic. It can be used without Angular as well. Security is built in. SSR is server-side rendering. Angular with Angular Universal supports Angular Universal. And there's this Zone.js concepts where the Angular creates zones in your application. So as you see, there are a lot of stuff, but let it not scare you. You can start with the basics, and you don't need to use all of them, of course. You can just pick what module you need. In a regular application, probably you will need all those. But it's nice, it's built in, right? So for guys, so for people who want to start with Angular, there's a super awesome tool called Angular CLI. So you download, install Angular CLI, you call ng new project, and you start with project using ng serve. It also has testing and linting, everything built in using Webpack. So my suggestion would be start working with Angular CLI. Otherwise, setting up Angular is kind of hard thing to do if you don't have any experience before. Okay, my thoughts on Angular after working with 2 years. I think it's 2 years, 2000. Yeah, I've been working with Angular since 2 years. I started PrimeNG in 2016. So there's a huge community, as I showed. There are a lot of resources, a lot of questions on Stack Overflow, books, trainings, everything. Is a lot of UI libraries except PrimeNG. I won't give a name, just know PrimeNG is the library to go with. Adoption is really good. I've seen that many users here. There's a strong market, so if you know Angular, it's likely that you will have no major problem in finding a job opportunity. There are many resources, as I've mentioned. Everything is built in, this stuff, right? You don't need to go out and look for a module to do validations, like in React. You have to do that in React. And it's quite powerful, so it has a lot of things. But these can be also negative, so the framework is complex. So it might feel very complex for if you're coming from React or Vue. It's mostly for single pages. You cannot just put Angular 2 or Angular 5 in like for a certain page. Angular wants to control your application. It wants to consume your application. It will just, it's like an octopus. It will just conquer your application. Once you go with Angular, you cannot go back. So learning curve is steep, so you have to work and spend hours and hours to learn the framework. And you have to learn TypeScript as well on top of it, a lot of things. Sometimes it feels to me too magical. So Angular has this idea is that when you move the mouse, when you do a set timeout, when you click something, it runs the change detection. Sometimes it just feels too magical, a lot of things going on. So maybe I would have preferred if I can control that magic, so it gives more opportunity to hook in, although it gives you callbacks and things like that. And watch out for performance, because, for example, if you are listening to a scroll, you have a div, and you scroll. If you scroll the bottom, you are going to load new data, right? So you have an Angular event on the scroll. When you scroll, Angular will run the change detection. So try to scroll, and your page will just die. So to fix that, Angular has this idea of that run outside Angular. Angular will not listen that scroll event for you. So, which gives me a strange feeling, because to increase the performance of Angular, you have to use this API called run outside Angular. It's kind of weird, but it does the job. Okay, so that's for Angular. We will get back to Angular later. So React, I've been doing React for like 1.5 years. I like the simplicity, I must say. You see, I only do mostly UI development. So Angular has too much stuff that I don't need, like, for me. But for an application developer, yes. In React, things are much easier for me to find my way around. And in React, it's like jQuery. Like you've seen that date picker thing. You have a div, and you initialize your application into that div. You have a JSX. I will cover JSX later. And you get a hook of that element, and then initialize your React element. One thing to learn with React is JSX. Some people like it, some people don't. I personally like it. JSX is like a syntactic sugar. It's like, it's JavaScript, actually, but it has to be compiled to JavaScript. So we have this image and a message, and JSX allows you to embed HTML into JavaScript. So we can do binding with the simple curly braces. I have this problem because some days I do React, some days I do Angular. In React, it's single curly brace, and Angular, the syntax is different. Sometimes I find myself writing Angular bindings in React, and so on. Sometimes I do prime faces, which is different syntax. So the Angular, when the page is rendered, it will just embed these values into your value. So you can create React elements from a single function, where you can assign that component to a JavaScript variable and then render it. It's quite simple. But if you need something complex, you got to start with the classes. Classes allows you to keep state. So if your component is stateful, like counter or clock, then you have to use state. In that case, we create an ES6 class that extends React component, and we have this render method that we need to override. Then, of course, you can inject it. The nice thing about it is that you can just use in your application somewhere React and somewhere Vue, mix and match. But Angular, as I mentioned, it's all Angular, nothing else. Okay, so it's a more complex component called clock. You see that state. This is a stateful component. The clock has its state, which keeps its date. So at every 1 second, at component did mount, when the component is initialized, it starts the interval, it starts the date, and you see the tick method calls set state. So it updates its internal state. When you do that, the render method will be called and the UI will be updated. Unlike Angular. In Angular, when you move the mouse, the change detection will be triggered and the UI will be updated. But in React, if you want to update the UI, you have to do render, which gives you more power. Although Angular has different change detection strategies, but most of the time, that's more stuff for you to manage. So how the forms work, in Angular you see ng model. There is no ng model or built-in binding, so you have to do it yourself manually with React. We have this in-state, I am keeping the username, and you have this input type text, and it's bound to the state's user property, and on change, I'm calling this save, and the save should update the state manually. So you have to write a lot of boilerplate, although there are helper libraries to do. So you don't, the idea of React is that being simple. Things like this is out of scope of React, so you have to use it like this or use an external library. One of the things why React is quite popular is React Native. Any React Native users here or who develop a mobile application? Okay. It's a bit tricky, but if you're coming from React, it's the natural choice. So you don't have to learn a new thing like Angular has native script, which is from Telerik, or the Ionic, which is called the which is used to create native, hybrid applications. But React Native, you don't need to learn a really new technology. I mean, it's built in, so you just import the components from React Native and you create your views. You can do page navigations. So the learning curve is much less compared to other libraries. And you don't need to learn really Android and Swift to create mobile applications. I have seen a lot of React Native applications lately, which I'm really excited about. So I'm really excited about the power of React Native. Okay, let's speed up. And React VR, a new project which is kind of cool. So I have PSVR at my home that I usually check out the YouTube videos. And it's a nice thing that with React you can also do VR as well. So with React VR, again, you don't need to learn anything. You just import components from React. It gives you like a pane, like a canvas. You can add text and a couple of elements, change the backgrounds, and you will get a VR application. So it will be cool that if you can tell your clients, we also have the VR mode enabled. Put these glasses on, and you can just move in our application. A lot of things can be done with it, like an e-commerce website. Maybe you can just move, go to another page, and buy stuff by looking at them. We will see if it shows up. Maybe. Okay, I will keep this open because I don't have much time. 10 minutes. Okay. To get started, you can use Create React app. I would suggest that because it says everything built in, and Create Native app for that as well. One thing about React, when you get started, you will hear this term, Redux. So what is Redux? Redux is like, after your React application starts, you will find yourself managing state in the components, managing data. Every component has its own state. And the data will be all over the place for complex applications. Redux solves this problem by creating a store. Store is like the one central point to keep all your data, and the components will just contact to that store. They don't keep data as their state. It's the single source of truth, and it's read-only. You don't manipulate them directly. And changes are made with reducers, which are pure functions. And then DevTools and easy ways of testing as well. So here's a diagram of Redux. You have this UI. When you do an on-click, you create an action, and you dispatch it to a reducer. Reducer just processes this action and updates your view. So this is extremely handy if you have a complex application. Not many these days big projects use React as it is. It's usually with React and Redux. So if you are starting with React, don't start with Redux. Start with React first, and then move on to Redux. Redux can be used with Angular and Vue as well, but it's mostly with React projects. Angular has NGRX store, and Vue has Vuex. Once you understand Redux, you can move on to Mobix. Mobix is another, it's like a competitor to, alternative to React, Redux. So it has, instead of single store, you can have multiple stores, and you can mutate the data directly. I'm not going into the details because of time. So React, what I think about it, I really like it. It's too simple to create UI components for me and to develop applications as well. It gives you the flexibility to come up with your own stack. You can choose what to use for validations because it's a huge ecosystem. You can choose what to choose for Ajax. And of course, it's a strong community, but these can be negatives as well. It can get you confused which Ajax library to choose from, which validation library. So it's a mix and match. If you like to be flexible, you may like React more. If you like something, everything built in, Angular is the one to go. Or Vue, okay. So you are deciding between Angular React, and then Vue pops up. And some guy comes and you say, okay, Angular and React are too old, just try Vue, it's the best thing. I heard it's good. So Vue is like, well, between Angular and React. It seems like it has taken the best parts of React and the best parts of Angular. It has templating, so you don't need to do the JSX complexities. You can do templating. And you can also do JSX as well. So we are creating a Vue application here with the app, and you have this message. When the message changes, your data changes, UI will be updated. You don't need to do set state. Or it's unlike Angular, when you move the mouse, it will be triggered. So it's like best of both worlds. You can use like ngIf via vIf, or ng for v4. So these ideas are from Angular, obviously. Events are like React and Angular. You define them in the methods section. I personally don't like the syntax of Vue, but it can be used with TypeScript as well. So I will probably go with TypeScript when I use Vue. And it has built-in model. So another idea of Angular, you can just bind your model. When you type something, it will be updated, right? So best things from Angular and React are merged into Vue. So like any other application, like Angular React, Vue has built-in component libraries and component hierarchy. These days, we are trying to create Prime Vue, which we create data tables tabs. So in our case, this is where I'm most interested in. You create a Vue component with user display. You define the props and your template. And there's something called single file components, where you can create your components in just one single file, although you will need Webpack for that. So the verdict is that it's simple but powerful enough, not too simple like React Core. You don't need much external libraries to come up with it. It has router as well and built-in, and the Vuex as well to do Radix. The problem is that it's like a one-man show. Evan is developing that. It's not backed by a company like Google or Facebook. He's asking for sponsorship. So if I was a corporate, if I'm going to invest 5 years of our engineering time on a framework, I'm not sure if I would go with a framework that is developed by one man. What if he will have a kid or something? Okay, web components, the last topic. This is me when I've heard the idea of web components, because in our case, we have to do Angular, React, Vue, blah, blah, everything when a new component library shows up. But with web components, we can do it once, and other libraries can use it, because it is standard. It's based on 4 standards: custom elements, imports, shadow DOM, and templates. So just like writing a div or span, you can, in your HTML, you can write data table, and it will be a custom element. No Angular, React whatsoever. No library. So this is, the trend is like frameworkless front-end UI. It's coming up. I've seen it in the conferences. So how to create applications without Angular, React, and other things. It's like a data table. We have drop-downs and so on. So these are just simple HTML elements. You can create them using the simple APIs. And you can extend them using the is property as well. The browser support is getting there. Chrome, of course, supports everything. To make web components work, you may need polyfills. Polyfills are small libraries to bring the things that are not natively supported in the browsers. Of course, it will slow it down. You can get polyfills from webcomponents.org as well. So there are a couple of writing plain web components is quite hard, so you would need frameworks. Again, which is kind of against the idea, right? And there's the popular ones are Google's Polymer and Stencil. Stencil is from Ionic, which is quite new. It has just been announced. Svelte and Skate.js are also there as options. In Polymer, you create an HTML file, and you create a DOM module. You have this template and your script, and you can do binding as well. Simple. And you can use these in your HTML page without any framework. I've seen a lot of cases where people are just using Polymer to create their application. I'm not really a fan of Polymer a lot because it does a lot of magic, and my components will depend on Polymer. And Polymer might have conflicts with React and Angular. Stencil is another idea. It's developed by Ionic. Ionic also has the same problem like us. They have to cram up, they were Angular based, but they want to reach other UI suites as well, UI frameworks as well. So they come up with the Stencil.js. It's quite different from Polymer because it generates web components instead of running them on the browser. It just generates standard components, and the browser runs them. Stencil just compiles it. And I really like the syntax. It's like Angular, you have the component, and it's like React with the render methods. So if you know Angular React, you can come up with, and I really like the annotation with prop to come up with props, and you have the state. So I feel like I already know Stencil. On Thursday, I have a talk on Stencil.js in our local Ankara JavaScript group. Maybe it will record it, I'm not sure. So I'm really excited about Stencil.js so that we can stop writing UI libraries for each of the UI frameworks. Okay, again with Polymer, you can create your application without Angular and React. The nice thing about web components is that you can use them standalone or within Angular, Vue, and React as well. So it's the nice thing. So you write it once, especially for us, and we can offer it in different suites. In future, so it's future-proof. If another library comes up and it supports web components, we're done. We don't need to do it again and again. Okay, testing, last topic. A library should be tested properly, and it should have testing features. Unit testing to do individual testing, and integration testing to run it in the actual environment. You have a lot of choices, like set up the environment, Mocha, Jest, Karma, Jasmine. For assertions, Chai is quite popular, Jasmine, Jest as well. I never used all of them. I currently use Jest, Jasmine, Karma sometimes, and the Protractor. For coverage, you have Istanbul and Jest, and for browser engine, you have, Nightwatch, Casper, and so on. This is a simple Jasmine application, and I will show you how we do a test on Prime NG panel component. So, okay, the VR is here, you see. If you have glasses with the browser, like I think Oculus has it, or in PlayStation VR or something else, you can just move along in the browser. You can interact with the elements, texts, and so on, which is nice. So we have this panel, simple component, and it's toggleable. So how do you test this stuff? So this is my code panel. I have this template, and there's a div here that I toggle using an animation. I have this toggleable property and so on. Panel, this is my unit test. I start with the panel. Angular allows me to create a test instance of that panel. I'm not running the browser here. Angular will just do it for me. And for example, it should display the header. I'm just setting the property, detecting the changes, and expecting a certain element to be on the page. Or when it's not toggleable, that toggle icon should not be there. Or when I do the toggle, you can do even clicks on your Angular elements, like here. I'm getting the that toggle icon, I'm clicking that, and I'm expecting that property to be updated. We can also do stops and spies so that certain methods should be called. It's very easy in Angular and other libraries as well. Okay, my suggestions would be that in React, you can use other libraries, but Jest is quite popular, of course, in the React world. We are using Jasmine and Karma plus protractor in Angular. And for Vue, you have Jasmine and Carmen as well. But you can use any assertion library that supports it, for example. Okay, monthly downloads. Any guesses, React? How many downloads? 5. More? 6? No, sorry. Vue. Okay, Vue's 1 million. Lately 1 million. It is like 900,000. But Angular is 2,250,000. React is the king with 7.5 million because of React Native and things like that. So React is like, seems to be winning, but others are catching up. And my final predictions for 2007, as 18 are the progressive web apps are the buzzword these days, the pushed by Google, so that you create your applications and they will be progressive if they satisfy certain conditions, like they're fast, they can be added to your home screen, and they can work whatever if you're in the plane or in a high-speed connection. So the frameworks need to be adjust themselves according to PVA. Angular 5 has introduced a lot of things like better service workers and things like that to support PVAs. And we will see how the others will work. And the second one is all the microservices revolution going on in the back end will find its way somehow to the front end. So instead of creating giant bundles, we will separate our UI into separate small bundles, and we can swap them on the fly without deploying the whole thing like a monolith. Final slide. How-to tips. I mean, if you are doing front end, you will be very. There's this called JS fatigue, which you will just go crazy after trying to learn all of the stuff. It happened to me, but you know, the idea is that don't get distracted by new stuff. If you are working on React, if there is a nice feature of Vue, just ignore it and keep working on React and just keep an eye on other things, but don't try to learn everything at once. Choose and stick with it. If your team has React experience, none of these are bad choices. If your team has React, go with React. If your team has Angular experience, go with Angular. Find a hobby. That's how I survived the JS fatigue. I've started learning Spanish and started going to the gym so that I can just move away all this from front-end land, which helped me a lot. And you gotta need to follow the standards. A lot of things going on at the ECMAScript lang, built-in modules and things like that. I really suggest following the standards. Otherwise, you will just, like me sometimes, sometimes I cannot work for 3 days, just giving a pause. Okay, I don't think we have any time, but we can just go discuss after the presentation. Thank you.